Imagine waking up one morning completely convinced that you are dead. Not confused, not dreaming. Actually, literally, physically dead. You look at your hands and know with absolute certainty that the flesh on those hands is rotting. You look in the mirror and see a corpse looking back at you. You tell your family, your doctors, anyone who will listen. And when they tell you that you are wrong, that you are standing right in front of them, breathing, talking, clearly alive, you feel genuinely sorry for them. They simply do not understand. You know what you know. You are dead, and nothing anyone says will ever convince you otherwise. This is not fiction. This is a real, documented, medically recognized condition, observed in patients across multiple countries and multiple centuries. It has a name: Cotard's delusion. And once you understand what it actually is, what it does to a person, and what causes it, you will never think about your own sense of reality quite the same way again. Here is something nobody tells you about your own mind. Everything you have ever seen, heard, felt, tasted, or experienced in your entire life has been a reconstruction, not reality itself, a version of reality that your brain assembled from incomplete information, filled in the gaps, and presented to you as the real thing. Your brain is not receiving the world directly. It is making its best guess about the world, constantly, automatically, every single moment you are alive. And what you experience as reality is that guess, not the world, the guess. Most of the time, the guess is good enough that the difference does not matter. You reach for a glass and your hand finds it. You hear a sound, and your brain correctly tells you what made it. You never notice the machinery running beneath it because the machinery works, but the machinery can break. And when it breaks in a specific way, in a specific part of the brain, something happens that is almost impossible to describe from the outside. Something more fundamental than confusion or disconnection fails. The ongoing, automatic, moment-to-moment confirmation that they are real, that their body belongs to them, that they exist, stops arriving. And in the silence where that confirmation used to be, the brain does what it always does when the evidence stops making sense. It reaches for an explanation. And the explanation it reaches for is the only one that fits the evidence. The condition was first formally documented by a French neurologist named Jules Cotard in 1880. He was a careful, methodical physician who had spent years studying the relationship between brain function and human experience. That year, he presented a case to the Société médico-psychologique in Paris that he described as unlike anything he had encountered before. His patient was a woman referred to only as Mademoiselle X, middle-aged. She had resisted every treatment her previous physicians had attempted. When Cotard asked her to describe her experience, what she told him stopped him cold. She told him she had no brain, no nerves, no stomach, no intestines, no internal organs of any kind. She told him she did not actually exist, that she was dead, that she had been dead for some time. When Cotard asked about the possibility of an afterlife, she told him she could not die in the conventional sense because she was already dead and had been denied the mercy of heaven. She believed she was condemned to walk the earth in a state of eternal non-existence. She had stopped eating because dead things have no need of food. She had stopped caring for herself because there was no self left to care for. Cotard named what he observed le délire de négation, the delusion of negation, the systematic denial of one's own existence. His colleagues were fascinated and skeptical in equal measure, but over the following years, similar cases emerged from physicians across Europe. Whatever Cotard had observed in Mademoiselle X was not unique. It was a real condition, and it was far stranger than even his careful clinical notes had conveyed. He spent the rest of his life studying it, convinced it was pointing towards something important about the nature of the mind that medicine had not yet developed the tools to see. He died in 1889 at 51 of diphtheria, still waiting for those tools to arrive. It would take another century before neuroscience caught up with what he had written down in that Paris consulting room. What emerged in the years after his death made everything feel heavier. Cases began surfacing not just across Europe, but across the world. a woman in rural Japan in the early 1900s who stopped speaking entirely because she believed the dead had no right to use language. A young man in Germany in the 1920s who continued going to work every day for 3 months while believing completely that he had died and was simply waiting to be officially informed. A patient in a London asylum in the 1930s who asked her doctors with complete sincerity whether they could arrange for her body to be collected because she had been dead for several weeks and found the situation embarrassing. Different countries, different centuries, different languages, identical conclusions. What those cases tell us collectively is stranger than any individual case within them. The human brain, regardless of what it has been taught to believe about death or the afterlife, arrives at the same specific conclusion when this particular system breaks. Not confusion, not fear, not a unique personal interpretation shaped by individual experience. The same conclusion, every time. Which means this conclusion is not a product of culture or personality or belief. It is built into the architecture of the mind itself. The belief that you exist is not a truth your mind discovered. It is a story your mind tells itself continuously, and it only keeps telling it because nothing has yet broken the mechanism that generates it. In its early stages, patients describe something that a surprising number of people will recognize in a milder form. The feeling of watching your own life from slightly outside yourself, of going through the motions of a day while some part of you observes from a distance, detached behind glass. Most people who experience this during periods of extreme stress find it passes, a glitch rather than a failure. But in some people, it does not pass. It deepens. And as it deepens, the glitch becomes something else entirely. Patients begin to know things about their bodies that are not true, but that feel more certain than anything they have ever believed. That their flesh is rotting, that their organs have stopped working, that their blood has ceased to move through them. Some become convinced that worms are living inside them. Some that their brain has turned to liquid. These are not fears. They are not lying awake worrying that these things might be true. They know they are true. The patients who recover describe looking back at this period with a horror that is different from anything they felt during it. During the delusion, there was nothing to feel. After it, with full consciousness restored, they could see exactly what had happened to them, how completely their mind had turned against itself while remaining utterly convinced it was the only reliable witness to the truth. Several have described that moment of retrospective clarity as more frightening than the delusion itself. Not the darkness, the understanding of how completely the darkness had passed itself off as light. In 1990, a man in his 30s was involved in a severe motorcycle accident in Zimbabwe. He sustained significant brain injuries and was transferred to a hospital in Edinburgh, Scotland. His name in the medical literature is only W.I. He recovered physically to a remarkable degree. Motor function returned, speech returned, memory largely intact. By standard medical measures, he had done well. But W told his doctors he was dead, not confused, not metaphorical, dead. And he had a theory about where he was. He believed he was in hell. This made complete sense to him. He had been alive. He had been in an accident. He had died. And now he was here, in this place that looked like Edinburgh, but could not really be Edinburgh because he was dead. And the heat confirmed it. The temperature in Edinburgh had been unusually warm for the time of year. Hell is hot. Edinburgh was hot. He was in hell. His doctors referred him to a neuropsychologist named Adam Zeman, who spent months in sessions with W.I., trying to understand how his brain was producing these beliefs. I knew his beliefs were unusual. He knew other people did not share them. But knowing this did not change what he experienced. The feeling of being dead was not a thought. It was a sensation, constant, overwhelming, foundational, the only explanation that fit. At one point, Zeman asked W what evidence would convince him he was wrong. You cannot argue someone out of a position they did not argue themselves into. In W's brain, the first system was intact. He could recognize everything perfectly. His own hands, his own face in the mirror, the hospital room, Edinburgh, Outside the window, he saw all of it clearly, but the second system had been severed by the accident. The recognition arrived, and then there was nothing. No warmth, no confirmation, just information floating in a void where the feeling of reality was supposed to be. His brain looked at that void and drew the only conclusion available to it. The person this information belongs to is no longer here. With treatment and time, delusion eventually lifted. He recovered. But Zeman, writing about the case years later, noted something that stayed with him. He had crossed to the other side and come back, and the crossing had left a mark that recovery could not entirely erase. He knew, in a way most people never have to know, that the feeling of being alive is not a given, that it is something the brain does, and that the brain had once, without warning, stopped doing it. The belief in one's own death is not random. It is the brain's logical response to a specific kind of sensory deprivation. When the feeling of being alive is taken away, the conclusion that one is dead is not madness. In a terrible way, it is reason. Which brings us to a case that in some ways is more disturbing than WIs. What happened to RS in 2015 had none. A woman in her early 50s developed Cotard's delusion following a severe depressive episode. No accident, no physical trauma, just a depression that deepened over months until it crossed some threshold into something her clinicians had no framework for. RS did not simply believe she was dead, she believed she was decomposing. She could smell it, a constant odor of rotting flesh that followed her everywhere. She avoided public places because she was concerned about disturbing others with the smell. She stopped bathing because bathing a corpse is pointless. She stopped eating with her family because she did not want to impose a decomposing body at the dinner table on people she still cared about. What her family experienced during this period deserves more attention than the clinical literature gives it. They watched someone they loved, physically present, physically intact, physically alive in every measurable sense, become completely unreachable behind a wall of certainty that nothing they said could penetrate. They could not argue her back. They could not love her back. Every attempt to convince her she was alive was received with the patient, slightly sorrowful tolerance of someone who understands that the people around them are working with incomplete information. The grief of being on the outside of a delusion so total that your presence registers as nothing more than a kind misunderstanding is a kind of loss that has no adequate name. She was treated with medication and electroconvulsive therapy. In RS's case, it worked. The delusion lifted. The smell faded. She described the experience of reality returning as the strangest thing she had ever felt. Then what does that say about the other certainties we carry without examining them? We build our entire lives on the assumption that our perception of reality is basically trustworthy. Cotard's delusion does not disprove that assumption, but it reveals it as an assumption. And there is a significant difference between a foundation and a foundation you have never thought to question. Researchers estimate several hundred cases of Cotard's delusion have been formally documented since 1880, several hundred across 145 years of global medicine. Clinicians who study the condition believe the documented cases represent a fraction of the actual prevalence. The condition is rare enough that many physicians will never encounter it and will not recognize it when they do. The number of people who have moved through the world in the quiet certainty of their own death without anyone ever giving that certainty a name is unknown. It is probably larger than the documented record suggests. And somewhere in that gap between the documented and the actual, between the named and the unnamed, lives a specific kind of darkness that medicine has not yet fully mapped. Somewhere right now, in a hospital or a home or a quiet room that nobody is paying attention to, someone is experiencing exactly this, and the slow, total, unshakable certainty that they are no longer here.